Okay, so our next session is going to focus on community as protagonists. This session is a chance to reflect on our conceptions of community and how those conceptions have changed over the past few years, as well as any implications that arise from this evolving understanding of community. Türkan Aksoy will be our speaker and moderator for this session. Türkan possesses extensive experience in both government and non-governmental sectors. Their work primarily focuses on enhancing the capacities of small and emerging communities, In their capacity as the New South Wales Coordinator for Welcoming Cities, Türkan takes pride in assisting local governments and allied organisations in their commendable initiatives. Through their work with Welcoming Cities, Türkan collaborates with local governments and their communities to advance Australia's aspiration to become a welcoming, prosperous and cohesive nation. Please join me in welcoming Türkan.
Thank you. Merhaba, hoş bulduk, hoş geldiniz. Hello and welcome to session 3. So I'm going to be talking about communities as primary leaders. And this is something that's quite deep and meaningful in my own experience as a migrant to this country. I'm going to try to see if I can utilise the clicker. Yeah, I'm judging by people, yeah. While that's happening, I just also want to let you know I am a neurodiverse person, so you're going to see me not reading a lot. I'm just going to be trying to get a lot of this information from my actual lived experiences and my brain, and sometimes, you know, that evokes some emotions as well, so I might get excited. Just letting you know. Well, ooh, we've got movement. I love it. So this is Tim Bishop, and this is Uncle Matt Lloyd. And I got a chance to meet these incredible people 17 years ago. So when I acknowledge country, which I am on Gadigal country right now, that's unceded country, it has a very deep meaning to my experience because of these two people. And not just them two, Uncle Harry, Auntie Nolene, Auntie Maggie. These people have been patient enough to sit down with a person like me to ask some really complicated questions. And sometimes those questions are really harsh and hard because their experience is harsh and hard. So sometimes these conversations take 2-3 hours. At no point do I go, I'm going to walk away from this, because it's such a gift to sit down with elders and understand them. I am a migrant to this country. I do not know how to navigate this country. I can't hear it, I can't see it, I can't feel it. I am a Turkic person. I was born in Ankara, Turkey, but my peoples go all the way from Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Turkestan, all the way to Hungary. We're very widespread, and I love that about Turkic people, but a lot of my knowledge has been lost. And it's through community elders that allowed me to give me permission to speak language. So as you know, when I got up here, I said, hoş geldin, I said, merhaba. The reason I say that is not because to let you know I've got skills. I do it because I want you to know that I come with ancestors. I pay humble respects to their ancestors, and I thank them for allowing people like us to be on country, for their patience and gifts for sharing story. I'd like to also extend those respects to each and every one of you. Your lineage, your ancestry. I'm hoping my ancestors are greeting yours. So I belong and work for this incredible organisation called Welcoming Australia, and you heard from my incredible CEO, Ali. So our team does some amazing work collecting stories. We're called story collectors. We only go for the good ones, so we go far, we listen deep, and we capture these stories over the year, and we compile a beautiful document. As you can see, there's a lot of love going into these pictures. Think about the lot of love that's gone into the stories. There's so much love gone into these stories. When we get these stories, we publish them But before we publish them, we actually sit down with these communities, sit down with the local government workers who have worked with these communities. They really respect and see communities as leaders, as protagonists. That's a word that's really hard for me, by the way, for someone who's neurodiverse, protagonist. That's why I went with community leader. What we also don't understand is sometimes a lot of these stories are captured and shared only when trust is established. Stories are shared that I've learned from elders that when they share a story, it becomes part of your story and you become part of their story. So when you take in these stories to other places, you honour it, you pay respects to it, and you make sure that it echoes. And so many of these stories have echoed. I'm going to give you an example of one of those stories. As soon as I can work out what I do with the clicker. Here we go. Found it. Okay, so this is a story called Stories of Strength. And we got this story because Bankstown was constantly being targeted. Yes, you terrorist people, you extremists. The amount of time I would see on the news about, young people from Bankstown are extremists. It's a hotbed for terrorists. Bankstown Poetry Slam. I don't know what they're doing over there. It was really terrible labelling. And I was living in those spaces, and that was not my reality, and that was not the reality of the people living and thriving in those communities. They were deeply connected, deeply respectful, and were very grateful and appreciative that they were living in this beautiful continent where they could feel safe, where their kids can go to school, they can get treatments, they can get educations, and they can get support. So they were very grateful people being labelled as not so nice terminology that I don't want to repeat it again. So Stories of Strength. This Stories of Strength title was loaded. We like to load language because it's not ours. So how do we load language that's not our own language? We make sure there's intention and meaning put into it. We were being labelled, yet our stories were strong. So we label that, Stories of Strength. We got funding from the Department of Multicultural New South Wales. Thank you, Multicultural New South Wales, for sending money to Bankstown. It's awesome. It was good funding too. And with that funding, what they did was they created this beautiful project where they were able to get young people intergenerational work. I love it. I love it when we get our elders and young people together to share stories. We recruited some amazing young people from Year 9 and Year 10 from one of the local schools. As part of that recruitment, we were giving them employable skills. Make sure you could go in their CV when they graduate or go to universities and open up other educational pathways, employment pathways. So we got them in doing that. You're going to get some skills. But they got so much more than skills. So they were given the opportunity to connect with a local elder that they respected and wanted to learn a little bit more about. So they sat down with this person, whoever they selected, and they asked several questions which they created. I love our young people and their brains, it's so wonderful. And they asked questions like, what was a difficult time that you went through? Why was it difficult? How did you get through it? What helped you get through it? Did identity have a role to play? And as these stories were being unpacked, these emotions were being unpacked, while photographs were being taken as this was happening, or documentation was happening, because we want to make sure that we can tell their stories vast and wide, these young people were able to see the people they had selected from a whole nother light. They were able to capture their stories in a podcast. They were able to take beautiful stylized photos. Isn't that a nice one? I'm just looking at that beautiful smile. That connection is very real. This young person has grown up to be such a big advocate and big voice because they were able to connect with these incredible people as part of their life story and life journey as well. So, little story out of Bankstown. Went to Lake Macquarie. Got a big amount of funding about Lake Macquarie and captured some beautiful stories from Lake Macquarie, because there's beautiful stories everywhere. If you look deep, you look hard, you find ways to connect. And these stories were captured about artists and writers and politicians and teachers and bus drivers and musicians. And they were displayed around their libraries, giving their community another perspective of people around them, another point of view, another point of reference that they can connect to. Hey, I saw your photo at the library the other day. OMG, that was you, right? Just on their way to Woolworths. It's so easy to be able to connect with somebody when you have, and create platforms for that connection to become real. And then he went for another trip. He went to South Australia. When I got this email that I had gone to South Australia, I did a little dance. I was like, oh, this is so good. Because it meant that these stories, these really beautiful stories, were travelling and being captured and being told, and that positivity was being spread out wide. And we're going to talk a little bit about more stories from our incredible esteemed guests and panellists to hear from some of their experiences about how communities are leaders in this space, how they are creating social change. They live the social change. They don't wait for just grants to come around. They don't wait for issues to be identified by a briefing to a minister. They're the ones who bring up the issues. Knock, knock, councillor, are you listening during the social planning process? Knock, knock, politicians, are you listening? Can I have an appointment? Knock, knock, oh my God, the Prime Minister's coming to Blacktown. How are we going to get his attention? It's election time. They are constantly leading because they are trying to strive for the communities to be able to have equity. Equity in jobs, housing, representation, education. The list is long on where they're striving for equity. And they want their stories to matter. And they want to create that change. So I was really privileged enough to be a part of this story that went all the way to South Australia. Really humbled by that experience. But we're going to hear from two other incredible voices who are going to share some of their experiences. Can I invite Samim and Daniel up, please, while I read their bios. Yes, I need glasses. Once you're 50, you need glasses. Okay. Welcome. Hoş geldin. Daniel Barakate, Director, Commissioning and Planning, Western Sydney Independent, Blue Mountain Strategy, Policy and Commissioning. Daniel holds a Bachelor of Arts, a Bachelor of Social Work, a Graduate Diploma of Social Inquiry, a Master of Policy Studies, and Executive Master of Public Administration. Ooh, that's a lot of accreditations. I'm really, really impressed that I'm in this stage with you. It's incredible. With a deep passion for service commissioning, program design, project, program, and change management, Daniel is dedicated to facilitating meaningful change that empowers and improves outcomes for children, young people, families, and communities. Currently, Daniel serves as the Director of Commissioning and Planning for Western Sydney and the Nepean Blue Mountains and the New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice. In this role, Daniel leads a talented team of planning and commissioning specialists, contract managers, working to build and enhance service across diverse communities of Western Sydney, which I love. I love Western Sydney. I grew up in Auburn. I love it. All right. And I'm just going to go through your... I know you don't want me to go through your bio, but I'm going to do it. I'm so sorry. Samim Loftus, Member Training Institute Board, New South Wales ACT. Samim works as the intersection of leadership, education, social transformation. He has spent over 15 years engaged in initiatives that build social cohesion and collective capacity within local communities and among emerging leaders. Through the New South Wales and ACT Baha'i Community Training Institute and a member of its board, he supports neighbourhood-based programs that foster agency, service and unity across diverse backgrounds. Internationally, he has coordinated and facilitated seminars with the Institute for Studies in Global Prosperity across Africa, Asia and Europe, which accompany university students and young professionals to examine how religious and scientific knowledge can combine to address society changes. His work focuses on cultivating the habits of dialogue, collaboration and shared purpose that underpin cohesive, unified and forward-looking communities. We are very fortunate to have you. I would love to hear a little bit about how do you see communities in an Australian context and has this changed over time? Who would like to go first?
Firstly, hello everybody, and I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people whose land I'm thankful to be on today. I live and work in one of the most diverse communities on the planet. The Cumberland local government area is probably the most diverse place anywhere on the planet. Not only diverse, but because of the leadership of amazing human beings, one of the strongest and most prosperous communities. Anyone who says that the West, is not where it's at is completely wrong.
West is best.
West is most certainly best. And I want to shout out to the leaders, some of whom are in this room, who have driven such great change, from the early pioneers, from the women who led, women's rights, to the people who pulled together community centres, and to most recently, watching the community tell us as government how wrong we were during COVID. I remember very clearly some community leaders in Western Sydney saying to us, "You've got your language all wrong, guys. No one's going to listen to that rubbish." They didn't quite say that. This is what we need to do. And those human beings gathered around and made sure that people in the community got their immunisations, knew what to do if they have COVID. And I thought, man, look at the social capital in this place. We hear all the time people weaponising diversity, undervaluing communities. And I'm telling you now that that is a mistake, that it is the leaders, it's not the government. It is the leaders who create those changes. We know that healthy, flourishing communities are underpinned by belonging. And the bedrock of belonging is that sense of acceptance and diversity. We know that those community spaces where people flourish and do well are underpinned by the leadership of good people. We know, for example, our neighbourhood centres and our community centres, our religious groups, are the places that actually hold communities when things go wrong. We see that in disasters, we see that in COVID, but we see that every day in the community services that are provided, whether or not they're funded by government. And I think probably more and more we're recognising that the role of the community and its leaders is actually the secret sauce that makes a difference.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I saw that firsthand, so thank you so much for articulating that.
Thank you very much. I think we need to speak to the organisers. There's a bit of a bias here. I'm also from Cumberland Council, Western Sydney, and totally agree. I came actually during COVID, right in the middle of it, as it was sweeping through Australia and the world, actually. And I was very fortunate to have I live in Westmead within the Cumberland Council. A diverse, welcoming, and warm community. And again, this is not speaking to the experience of the board, but my personal experience was the tenacity, the resilience of a people's was formed by their community identity. And I think therein lies the question, when you ask the question of how is community thought of in Australia and how has it evolved. The evolution side I'll stay away from, but when we think of a community, we can think of many different communities, and we do have many communities. Even if we just look at Sydney or Western Sydney, you have community groups that are formed around religious belief. You have ethnic groups that form as a community. You have special interest groups, sports groups. They identify themselves as a community. But I think what's quite important for us to think about, especially for those who are social actors and concerned with progress and the evolution and transformation of society, is how do we define a community that achieves that purpose? And I think the purpose Daniel really has put forward some wonderful thoughts around the power and strength that a community plays in a society. And so when the board thinks about a community, particularly around some of the work that we're doing, really the purpose of us trying to understand the communities we work with is to see what is the organization that allows for change to happen. And the most basic unit then that happens in, or the basic unit of the society, is the family. Change happens there, but a family lives within something much larger. And so for individual actors, groups of people to try and bring change and withstand the forces or the things that are happening around them, the cost of living, the growing sort of sentiments that we're seeing swirling around our society, you need something to buffer that. And society is too large to be that thing. It's too big. There's too much going on. And a community actually serves as a place where individuals, groups of people can work together with a common vision to resolve the challenges that they face, to answer the questions. And I'll give an example in one of the communities that we work with. Very simple, the cost of living crisis. I don't know if that's the word we want to use for it, but really the huge rise in that. A group of that community came together and said, how do we respond to this? How do we work together rather than waiting for the government to do something. What can we do to show that resilience? And finding solutions to then answer that as a community. And when I say community, in a sense geographical, a small area where you have other groups, other communities within that community that can work together, overcome their differences to answer common concerns, to answer common issues and find solutions creatively.
And thank you so much for touching on the intersectional aspect as well. We have many things, not just one. We're not labelled as just, you know, young people or seniors or people with disability. Like we can be all of those things as well. So responding to that is going to require that intersectional lens as well. Thank you so much. How do you see the role of communities in their role of supporting social cohesion? What role do they play?
I should probably go first this time. I touched on it briefly. When we think about social cohesion in Australia, the challenge before us as a society, a remarkable land that we live in with huge diversity, big changes happening, huge international pressures, huge national pressures. I could list them for you, but I think the people in this room are far more aware of them than I am. Where is it that you can actually make the most substantial change? And as I said before, if you look just to the individual, you're like a drop in an ocean. When you look at a family, they're a unit. But at the same time, while they can buffer themselves against some of those things and find solutions within, there needs to be an environment in which the individual, the family thrives. The community offers that. And of course, as I said, you can define community in many different ways. But one of the ways that we've seen as very useful for social transformation is actually a geographic community, where it's the questions that you're trying to solve are with your neighbor. The questions you're trying to figure out around the education of your children are within the people on your streets. And so it's within that setting where it's not too large to be overwhelming, but it's also not too small that you can't have an impact, that the greatest outcomes can happen. You have creativity, you have resources, and you have people who have common concerns, common humanity. So that's where I see the role that community plays, is that it is that microcosm of a bigger society where you can start to make changes that are substantial enough to protect the individual, to strengthen the individual and the family, but are not so big that you can't reach them, societal issues, at a broader level.
Thank you.
I can't agree more. We know the research tells us that healthy, flourishing people come from healthy, flourishing communities. It's that simple. Our department and our sector works with people probably at their worst, and we know that the best way, and this is the same with health as it is with any other sort of human service, the best way to improve the health of people is to look at the health of the population around them, right? We know that. That's what the research tells us. You strengthen communities, you strengthen the people who live within them. It's critical, and we know that the best way of reducing people's vulnerabilities and risk factors is by strengthening the communities around them. And I think that that's really critical, and you know, often people think, oh, you know, government is where the solutions are. But if you look at all of the big social changes across history, it's good people banding together, actually getting the attention of money and government and others, and I think we don't underestimate that. Think of the work that good community members have done in terms of reconciliation, in terms of, specialist domestic and family violence services, in terms of childcare services, in terms of you name it. We also know that it's that social capital, the building of trust, that actually are the things which make governments listen and also bring forward change. So I want to say that it is that community where that happens. And, you know, the old saying, it takes a village to raise a child, it really does. I'm sure many of you have experienced that yourselves. But, you know, I think this very individualist culture that we live in, I think we need to be really conscious of, because, people's language about my thing and your thing, the power of identity politics to divide us, to make us, blame one another is so strong. But I think if we really need to keep a firm hold on the fact that actually it is our celebration of each other and working together that will be the thing that will cause change. It has in the past, it will in the future. And community is the vehicle by which that can happen. It's real and close enough to be not abstract, but it's not too big to be ungainly. And I think that if you look back, whether it's a response to a disaster, whether it's a response to a pandemic, whether it's a response to a social injustice, those have always and will always happen from communities and humans getting together to say, we're not okay with this. And if you look at the social movements throughout history in any part of the world, you'll see that that is a common theme.
Oh my God, good people. I love good people. During the referendum, I remember thinking, how are we going to get all this information out to all these language groups? Where's all my resources? Where's all my printed files and pamphlets and resources that I couldn't access them? And it was in activation of good people. I'd like to name one. Eva from Poland is in the room. Yep, incredible. And there was my little videos, in language, and all sorts of languages too. It wasn't just 1, 2, top 5. I think they did like 38 languages, maybe more. And they did videos, and they did pamphlets, and they did resources left, right, and centre, and they were pumping that translation out like nobody else. And it was the activation of good people, not just going, oh, this is my contract, or this is something I need to apply for, going, hold on, there's a need, and stepping into that role. Let's take a little more of a deep dive into the activation of good people. These good people are in the room right now. What would you advise them to say, how we're going to support and be collectively and creatively in synergy to support social cohesion? What would that look like?
I think it's something that happens every day, and sometimes we don't take enough time to reflect on that the relationships we have build trust. They not only restore individuals' dignity, but, you know, I'm thinking of the neighbourhood centre that, you know, also runs a food pantry and supports people who might be struggling, and makes sure that if people have kids who are struggling at school, they're linked in with, you know, some specialist supports or the NDIS. I'm thinking there's a whole heap of examples. I think don't underestimate the work you do that creates hope, change, and pathways for people. I think that often, you know, there is a lot of investment in communities, but I think what the magic source is where people work together, and you know, the reality is we have some of the best community networks and community centres and neighbourhood centres, or I think we do in Western Sydney. I'm very proud of them, and great councils who actually invest in infrastructure in society. So I think it's about not underestimating the power of all of that infrastructure, but also groups like yourselves, groups, you know, religious groups, our community leaders, and actually harnessing them. And also, you know, there's value in, you know, there's always value in advocacy, but I think there's also great value in thinking about the relationships creating change and then that going forward. And sometimes we underestimate those little micro things, like the person going, oh my gosh, how do we translate that? You know, in the Yes campaign, you know, during COVID, you know, and there's thousands of other examples. It didn't take, you know, new contracts. It didn't take, you know, massive procurement processes. Yeah. It didn't take all sorts of complicated government bureaucracy. It actually took people going, there's a need, how do we work together? And I think it's how we can draw on the resources in those communities, whether they're government or other, and bring them to bear. And I think creating spaces for that dialogue across difference is really critical. And I think sometimes we don't do that enough. Yeah. Either because we've moved away from it, or you know we're worried about this big thing that we need to do. And I think that sometimes it's remembering the things that make a difference after all are relationships, and things start from there.
Yeah.
I think Daniel's covered most of it. No, but maybe to add two things. I think if we look around the room here, we have representatives of communities, we have those who represent institutions or organizations. And I think one of the things, and it's come through from what we've talked about today, is that we've talked about the community as a protagonist or as an entity. But when we think of society, there are other actors. There's the individual and their capacity, their agency, and there's also the institution. Those three together play a vital role in the way forward. And so what you tend to see actually is the individual fighting for their freedom, the institution sort of really trying to get what it's trying to do across and get that obedience or whatever, however you want to describe it, and you have a community that's trying to put itself forward for precedence. Now, I think one of the things that we can do quite practically is whichever of those we represent, and we all are individuals, so we at least represent one, is to ask ourselves, what is our role and how do we create common purpose going forward? Because I think actually if we look at the society of Australia, it in itself has vast complexity, huge resources, and when I say resources, I don't just mean material, skills, ability, history, thousands of years. The oldest living civilization is here, right here on the land we're on. So there's a depth of resource, and that was my second point, is first to find a point of a commonality and purpose, and ask oneself, how am I making sure that that's happening? And the second one is to think of resources beyond just places to gather, material. There's also the skills of the community, and to ask ourselves, what are those skills that will help the next stage that we're in, this evolution that's happening?
I saw people connecting here already, you know, having those relational conversations and saying, I'll follow you up with an email. It's so good when you are talking to people that are not part of your own networks, to jump in and out of spaces, to listen and hear what they're doing so we can amplify, cheer, support some of each other's work as well. So I just want to ask you to give them an incredible applause to say thank you for their wonderful feedback.